seat. And then if someone wants the question to be called, they can say that. We rarely do that. There's just a natural sense of flow at the end that, the questions are done for staff, and then we'll vote on the motion that's proposed in the agenda. If that doesn't work for you, let me know, but it just saves everyone the time of pushing the button and reading it all out. I end up doing all the reading. That's kind of how it's done here at the SRD. Okay, so I think we are on time, 1 minute after, and we have now confirmed there is a quorum. So I'll call the meeting to order of the Strathcona Accessibility and Inclusion Advisory Committee. I'm the chair, Susan Sinnott from the City of Campbell River, and I would like to acknowledge that we're located on the traditional territory of the Liquital people. So now I've been looking for a motion that the agenda for January 25th, 2024 meeting of the Strathcona Accessibility and Inclusion Advisory Committee be adopted as presented.
I motion that the adoption of the meeting minutes.
Thank you.
Sorry, Cindy Rogers.
Thank you. And seconded by Adrian?
Anne-Marie Long.
Anne-Marie, thank you. Any further discussion on the motion to accept the agenda? Any amendments proposed? Okay, hearing none. All in favor? Any opposed? And if you don't raise your hand, that's deemed to be an acceptance. If you want to oppose, raise your hand at that time. If you want to say you definitely want to accept, just raise your hand at the time when I say all in favor, and then as a visual. If you have another way you want to do it, just by saying I'm in favor, but you'd have to say it turning on the microphone. Now, I do note here, Mr. Huell has visual issues. Do you see the microphone in front of you, Mr. Huell?
0.
Okay, so what can we do to assist you?
Just an audio cue, and I appreciate what you just said there. I just put your hands up or something.
Thank you. We're all learning as we go along and all the things we need to do. Appreciate it. Okay. So we have another motion because we had one meeting before. Now we're going to adopt the minutes. That the minutes of the meeting of the Strathcona Accessibility and Inclusion Advisory Committee held on October 5th, 2023 be adopted as presented.
I will make a motion that we adopt the minutes from the Strathcona Accessibility Inclusion Advisory Committee meeting held on October 25th. Or not 25th, 5th, 2023.
Thank you, Committee Member Delancey. Is that how I say your last name?
Yes.
Thank you. And is there a seconder?
I can second that.
Thank you very much, Committee Member Mann. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? I think that's carried. Thank you. And if I don't pay attention to the people online, I apologize. Sometimes it's a challenge as the chair to see what's sort of going off to one side of me. I think now we're getting to is there any business arising from this minutes? Is there anyone want to bring up from the minutes from our first meeting? Okay, I didn't expect to. I think we're excited to get to the next part. We'll need a motion with regards to the staff report that's the major part of our business today, that regarding the proposed Strathcona accessibility plan, that the report from the Chief Administration Officer be received. So again, you make a motion, somebody, to do that.
Cindy Rogers, I motion. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. And second?
I can second. Anne-Marie Long.
Thank you. I believe we have not a staff report, we have a consultant's report, correct?
Yes, good morning, committee members. It's Renee Labacane here, and just wanted to remind you that the Strathcona Accessibility Plan, we worked with Trish Kelly at our first meeting to help us identify barriers that would be included in the accessibility plan, and with the assistance of Trish, we did develop this plan and have invited her to help us walk through the plan today and obtain your feedback. So I will pass it over to Trish, who will share the document and walk us through it.
Okay, thanks so much. Really happy to be here virtually with all of you. Not quite as fun as when I got to be with you in person, but glad to be here nonetheless. And it's really exciting to see the plan now laid out with some graphic design. So it's looking like a real thing now. So I'm going to pull up that content and let's see here. So share my content or a PDF. I guess I need to actually pull it up. Just one moment, please. Well, that is surprisingly not where I thought it was going to be. I may just pull it from the website, from the hyperlink that was shared in the agenda. Oh, wait, here it is. Okay. Thanks for being intuitive, teams. Okay, so we're going to walk through the sections of the plan. We did receive some feedback by email, so I'm also going to make sure to read through the feedback that was received. In terms of what we're looking to get feedback around today and the process that this is going to go through beyond the accessibility committee today. So this includes the barriers that we talked about in the last meeting. It also has been looked at by the partner organizations. And then today we're looking at, is there any feedback around the content that's in here so far? If I think, as I saw in some of the feedback we got by email, if it's additional barriers that now that you've seen this in writing, you're like, oh, I forgot to mention something, we will be capturing that feedback, and that will go into the barriers inventory spreadsheet that has been created to capture all of the feedback in terms of what was noted. Was it something that all organizations could consider, maybe they could collaborate on, or is it really specific to a particular, like the municipality or the library? So if you have additional barriers that you want to bring up today, that's where we'd be putting that information. And otherwise, we're looking for feedback around the content overall. Well, I guess we'll just start from there, and then Renee may have a few other things to say about the process going ahead. I'm going to make this as big as I can without losing the page integrity. So let's see. One thing to note is that there is imagery throughout this plan, and I think that the graphic designer and Renee's team have been careful to look for representation of people with a diversity of disabilities. So the cover image includes two people, an older person and a child, who are using sign language and communicating with each other on a playground. And you'll see that kind of theme running through any of the imagery that's in this document. There is a territorial acknowledgement and mention of who the partners are of the organization, an accessibility statement that says that this plan in its final form, when the public sees it, will be remediated so that it is a PDF that is accessible to screen readers and other people using assistive technology or who have low vision. So it will be remediated to be accessible, but there's also the email address accessibility@srd.ca that people could reach out and ask for an alternative format. So sometimes people may ask for a Word version of a document, and they could do that. So moving on, there's a table of contents, which I don't think is too thrilling, but we'll just skip by that. The size of the font is quite large as well, so that table of contents takes 2 pages, and that is partly just ensuring from an accessible design perspective that there is adequate white space to make it easier for people to read, and that people who may have vision-related disabilities, if there's a minimum font size to allow for easy reading. There's an introduction that starts to introduce some of the concepts behind accessibility as they relate to the Accessible BC Act, and to think about like who's the audience for this document. Obviously, community members are a primary audience, so that they see what all of the partner organizations are planning to do and how they're viewing their requirements under the Accessible BC Act. But it's also a document that is going to help in a very educational way to start socializing some of these concepts. So some of the things like what is accessibility, what is the definition of disability, this document will be very helpful even thinking about the staff at all of those organizations and in other community organizations. So keep that in mind. This is a tool for education as well. Then it moves into the framework guiding the work. So there's the context of what is the Accessible BC Act, and noting what is required right now, but also what is coming next in terms of the expectation around more specific standards in different areas. And also the inclusion of the guiding principles that are in the Accessible BC Act. So those are the principles that any committee and organization is supposed to use to frame their work around accessibility. So that includes inclusion, adaptability, diversity, collaboration, self-determination, and universal design. And there's definitions for each of those. So these would be new concepts for many people reading the document, but probably not for people from the disability community. Then there's discussion about the framework. So how is this group of organizations in these communities, how are they looking at organizing the feedback that they get about different types of barriers to accessibility? So there's a description of what are employment or transportation, built environment related barriers, delivery of service, information and communication, procurement, education, health, and capacity, which was one that was unique. It's not one of the standard areas that is mentioned in the Act, but given the small organizations at the table, some of the partner organizations wanted to see that called out as a challenge and a barrier for them organizationally. Then there's some information about the community context. So there's a map of the vast area that is represented by Strathcona Regional District, and mention of the actual communities that are involved and how many people, that is 48,000 residents across that area. Then there's an explanation of what that regional approach looks like. So that this is a group of partner organizations, including the municipalities and the regional government and other partners that are looking to create a collaborative approach to how they address accessibility barriers. And mention some of the challenges that come with remote communities. And I think part of it is setting that expectation that there is an opportunity for collaboration and those smaller communities and organizations to share resources and look for ways to work together to address some of these barriers, as opposed to feeling like they have to do everything on their own. Then there's the next page is talking about this initial plan. So there's a very nice infographic with 7 steps that are laid out in a circle, kind of like a cycle that will happen in terms of how those partner organizations are going to, develop this plan and continue to address accessibility. So it starts with representatives of the Strathcona accessibility partners developing an initial regional plan and then bringing it to you as the Accessibility and Inclusion Advisory Committee. It mentions that we're doing that work to identify barriers and get feedback around accessibility, including on the plan itself, which would be we're at step 2 right now in terms of this 7-step process. Then it will move on to finalization of the plan with those partner organizations, and they'll take it back to their organization to start the discussions internally about the actions that they're going to take. They'll develop their own plans. Then the step 5 is deciding what projects they can work on together, and you'll see that in the action items. I think we've flagged some, and then it's also in that spreadsheet where we're tracking all the barriers, which ones look like good opportunities to work on together, like raising awareness and campaigns and that sort of thing. And then each organization will plan their own implementation for their individual actions, and they'll also be planning collective projects. And then the final step is that the SRD, so the Strathcona Regional District, and the partners will report back to each other and to the committee about how things are going, and the cycle will kind of start again. So I think that's an interesting aspect of accessibility too, is to think in some ways we know that relying on graphic design is not going to be inclusive for everyone. I can't wait to see what the alt text looks like on this graphic. It'll be quite juicy. But at the same time, there are many people who are visual learners. And so having something visual to help demonstrate that cycle and the relationship between them is going to be it'll be quite helpful for some people. So really making sure that information works for everyone is the goal with an accessible document. Then there's some capturing in the next section called work to date around what has happened so far. So establishing this committee would be one of the key achievements so far. And there's information about the committee, including a link to where the terms of reference live online. There's also mention of your names and communities that you're representing, which is publicly available information through the website already, but is also included here in the plan. Then it talks about the barrier identification exercise that we did in October and includes some like the barriers that were noted. So we did take notes from that session. And so there's a description of the barrier and then classification of it. Is it an attitudinal barrier, which many of them were? Is it built environment? And in some cases, it was multiple like it straddled many categories. Like there's one that is attitudinal and health related, for example. So again, thinking of this as a teaching document that can help all of those folks working in the partner organizations, having this list as a starting point is really valuable, I think, to get them starting to think about how to classify barriers and the kinds of things that are coming up. But it isn't going to be exhaustive either, given we only had one meeting together. Then we pulled together, we had each of the partner organizations give us a summary of what they have done so far before starting this process. So it's a bit of an inventory of projects and actions that support accessibility. So there's each of the partners has some information in there about what they have done. And we tried to kind of then, once we got the reports, kind of harmonize it so that it was kind of similar information or presented in a similar way. So that goes on for several pages. There are a lot of hyperlinks in there too to the actual, like maybe the web page where there's more of a description. And for example, with the school district, there's a lot of policies that they were able to note in terms of how it relates to accessibility for faculty or for staff and students. And then the next section has next steps. So in the next steps section, that's the description of, okay, so each organization will be responsible for developing, some actions on their own, and committing that there will be continued efforts to continue to identify more barriers with the committee, and then taking responsibility for developing their own plan and partnering on collective initiatives. And then there's also a flag around looking for opportunities around funding or training or public awareness as some of those collaborative pieces. Towards the end of the document, there is note about what that public feedback mechanism is. So there is a hyperlink to the Strathcona Regional District's accessibility page where people can report accessibility barriers. And as alternative formats, if that page doesn't work for someone, there's an email address listed and a phone number as well. And again, just more imagery of people with different types of disabilities represented on that page. Very fittingly, there is a person who has, looks like some limb difference. They have a prosthetic hand and they're leaning forward on a phone, looking at a website, perhaps calling and leaving a message for Renee at Strathcona Regional District. And then a small mention of monitoring and evaluation as well, so that there will be a review of the progress to date in September 2024, and coming together as partner communities to discuss ways to reduce barriers. And to determine if there's appetite for continuing with a regional plan, or if everybody's kind of off and running and ready to start their own customized plan. There's a couple of appendices at the end. So we've got the meeting agreements that we developed in the last meeting are drafted here. Again, a kind of a teachable moment for other organizations, but also a way to hold everyone to account for ensuring that these meetings happen in an accessible way. So some of those pieces, like having the materials available 48 hours ahead of time, that we should take a break for any meeting that's longer than 60 minutes, and some thinking about in person, if you're there in person, ensuring that you're minimizing the use of scented products, and that we do use a limited amount of slides and images, and that we really are talking through whatever is on the screen, so that everyone has access to the same information and it gets recorded into the meeting minutes or transcript. There are also a few key definitions that most of them are pulled directly from the Accessible BC Act itself. And then a few resources that are shared in terms of some free courses and some other resources that the reader could follow through on. So that is the overall flow of the plan. I'm going to scroll back up to the top and have it ready here in case there's a section that you would like to revisit with your feedback. We did get some feedback that I should share from some of the members of the committee who couldn't make today's meeting. So I wonder if I can pull that up nicely without sharing my very messy inbox with you. Let me try to do that. Okay, I think I've been successful. You're still seeing the plan, and you don't have to see how many emails I need to clean up before the end of day Friday this week. So Christine sent some feedback, and I would say that I think it falls into the category of additional barriers that were prompted. So let me just pull those up and read them out. Okay, so there's some general accessibility considerations that Christine wanted to mention. So there is some mention around employment, procurement, and employment supports that Christine noted that while many employers have disability advocacy and inclusive hiring practices included in their hiring and employment policies, it's often not followed. So that that is a barrier, is just not following through on well-intended policy. And that's especially true, she says, for mental health supports and hidden disabilities. And that probably the opportunity for addressing that barriers through education and training, not just having a policy and expecting people to read it and internalize it. I would also note that there was a mention at the top that there may be a typo with Christine's name in the actual plan itself, where she's called Kim and not Christine Woods. So that's something we should check into as well. There's also some mention around the inequities with COVID mandatory vaccination policies in terms of some people with chronic illnesses not having then therefore that becomes a barrier to them continuing their employment. There's also a flag that to make sure that parking that is accessible is updated in terms of how we describe it. We would call that accessible parking, not handicap parking, as many older signage might say, or people that are not current on their language choices might say. And also that a flag around making sure that there are emergency safety plans for that are specifically addressing people with disabilities. There are some additional ones that are related to our partner organizations, including some feedback for Vancouver Island regional libraries and school districts as well. So I guess I could share that just here to say that a flag for the library around internet accessibility for websites, there's some feedback there. And also for the school district around a transportation assistance policy, ensuring that it includes transportation for children whose parents have a disability. And a flag around a typo on page 27, which is that remotely is spelt incorrectly. So we'll make sure that that gets addressed. And I believe that there was also a spelling error in Adrian's name. So we're going to make sure that that gets addressed as well. So that is the feedback that was received by email. So I think we're ready to talk about it here in the group. Does anyone? I won't necessarily be able to see everyone in the room, but let's start with online. Does anyone want to put up their hand and has feedback they want to share? Yeah, Anne Marie.
Hi. This may be a bit sort of closing the barn door after the horses are escaped, but I'm wondering why SD72 isn't a partner on this, because that's the biggest school district in our area.
Yeah, I think that they were developing a plan of their own. Am I right, Renee?
Yes, that's correct. They were working on their own plan and didn't need to participate in the regional one. However, they will, on occasion, they would like to sit with our committee and collaborate on training that we might have in the future. They would like to participate in there and occasionally join our committee as well, depending on what topics are on the agenda.
Oh, awesome. I just had some wording around the parking exemptions for people with disabilities, but I can email that in.
Okay.
I was wondering about the use of the blue font, which may be challenging for people who have color blindness. And maybe if that's an issue, there could be a version where blue or green is not used. And I was also thinking that a lot of what's in this document is really, really excellent. I think it was really well worded. It's good as an aspirational document in terms of education. I worry that the plan itself is one page and it's more aspirational than it is specific. And I'd like to sort of identify what are some of the priority areas and what might be some examples of tangible things that people could do. Because if you don't already have an understanding of disabilities, to read that one page, you kind of said, well, it's up to us to figure out what we want to do, and we don't know what we want to do. So having some specific tasks, some specific timelines, some specific targets that people can then report back on, yes, we met this, or no, we didn't, I think would be more useful in terms of the plan being actionable rather than aspirational. I was looking at the Metro Vancouver one, and they have identified a number of priority areas, which then have some suggested actions underneath that. And I thought that was a nice format. So those are sort of my big general thoughts on that. Also, on page, I have to pull it up on my phone because I don't have it on my screen. On page 14, under barrier identification exercises, the second paragraph. So the committee also discussed barriers they've experienced or noticed. They hope partner organizations, I think we should have between noticed and they, have the word that. Because the sentence was, I had to read it a couple of times to understand what it was trying to say.
Thank you. Thanks, Anne Marie. Renee, is there anything that we can share around the how toothy this document can be given the partners memorandum of understanding and what the agreement is across that community, is there room to be more specific and list more tangible items at this level, or is that the next phase in that that cycle that's in the infographic at the beginning?
What I anticipated with this plan is the partners did get together and looked at all the barriers. We have those in a spreadsheet, and we're looking at ones that we could collaborate together on, and ones where it might be the individual organizations. So I see that kind of as a next step. I agree that this is inspirational, and between identifying the barriers and deciding what to, a plan of action of how we can address those barriers is kind of where we're at right now with that group, and that's why the barriers are listed in here until we have a full action plan on how to address them and put some timelines along with those actions.
I wonder if there are any of the partner organizations that are part of the group today that might have some insight into like how, since we had that conversation and did the barrier identification together at the meeting, when you got to see that spreadsheet and talk about next steps within your organization, like how are you thinking, or what have you done so far to start having that conversation internally? Maybe help the committee too Serena.
Sorry to interrupt. I figure this
No, it's
might
great.
be a good
Yeah.
segue for me to share. So for those that may not know who I am or may have forgotten, and that's really okay. I'm Serena Claver. I'm one of the planners with the City of Campbell River, and I've been working alongside Trish and Renee and each of you through this process. And so I am the staff kind of liaison or lead, trying to learn more about the Accessible BC Act and then try and kind of share that knowledge with city staff. It has been a slow process. I will preface that. The starting point was fortunately, we do still follow a pretty hierarchical kind of process. So it was ensuring that our city manager, our CAO, was informed, and then to share that knowledge with our senior leadership. And now our next step is for me to do a presentation to our senior, all the managers of all the departments. So essentially, we're kind of going through this educational process to ensure staff are aware and cognizant of the legislative changes that we're working on this project. This committee exists. And with our presentation next week is to starting to mobilize. Trish and I have been trying to kind of facilitate kind of educational webinars that she facilitates. That hasn't happened yet. We're striving for it last year, but senior staff wanted to actually work through this kind of educational awareness, I guess, probably to try not to, because there's going to be so many questions, just like we're having today, staff are not as privy and cognizant, or at least not everyone is, of what this all means. And so kind of wanted to come in somewhat informed and knowledgeable enough. So this next presentation is to bring management up to speed and then to really start to dial into these action steps of what, this is what the committee has shared in terms of barriers and where we could potentially move into some priority areas, and how are we actually going to, like you said, take these aspirational kind of goals and start to break them down into greater actions. So it's happening. So after this presentation with city management, we will be asking Trish to help us still follow through with those kind of educational, or at least one where we're starting to brainstorm more together, and then we can start to embed in kind of tangible goals, or at least share back and find a way of embedding into our plan here, but then also kind of breaking that out and establishing more of a city-specific accessibility plan too. So, yeah, that's what I can kind of share right now.
So to be clear, you'll be developing a plan for the city, and then you'll be sharing that back at the partners table, and the expectation that all of the partners are going to be doing that, and that that information would then come back to the committee as well, right?
Yeah, and I think we established that with the partners because of, the city is obviously has greater capacity staffing wise, funding wise. For one of the larger municipalities in the regional district. It's not fair that it's a comparable of what sort of plan the city puts into place, because there's going to be other municipalities that are probably going to be solely focused on what gets established in this regional or the Strathcona accessibility plan. So yes, we will bring that forward. Maybe that will help to mobilize capacities, whether we pursue other grants, educational kind of directions. But yeah, I think that is a kind of role and responsibility of the city, being one of the large municipalities, to help to kind of mobilize more action and support some of the other municipalities along the way. I think that's kind of the alignment that we're striving for here.
So it's the chair, Susan, speaking. Trish, could we get more feedback from our members on the plan as presented? And then at the end, I have a couple of comments that may be more practical.
Yeah, great. I started with online. I don't know if there's anyone else online that wanted to give some feedback. Or should we move into the room? I see someone has their hand up in the room.
Yes.
Cynthia?
Hi, Cynthia Rogers-Zabalis. I really like what you're doing. I think it's amazing. My name is spelled wrong in there, but thank you very much. I know it's minuscule. I really liked, Anne-Marie, like, what is next? What are we actually going to do? It's more, it's not just about what we say, it's also about what we do. So I'm online with her with that. The other thing is that I really need help understanding how this fits with the school district, because when I go to the school board meetings, I get the impression they expect you guys to do everything, Strathcona to do everything, and then wait and then just, ride the coattails of Strathcona, because they're not willing to discuss accessibility issues with me. I had to badger them to get the website, the link up. They said, so I don't know how to proceed, and I don't know how this works with SD 84, because there seems to be a huge disconnect. So I just want to put that out there, that I'm seeking help with that and how to deal with that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Maybe you could talk to Renee afterwards, and she can work with the other working people in the group. We don't have an SD84 person today, so they haven't heard your comments, but we'll certainly pass that along about specific needs that you have. Anyone else in the room? Yes, go ahead. Is it
Christine, not the Christine that was initially described with their comments. They were good comments, but they weren't mine. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to ask about is the senior citizen population, and it's a bit tricky because, we wouldn't say that being elderly is a disability in its own right, and that would be ageism to say that. However, there's also, it's also very true that they are going to have a much higher incidence of barriers just as part of the aging process. So I'm wondering, starting off with the images being representative, in the plan, it would be nice to see an elderly person who was maybe had a disability and was, because there's quite a few of younger people. So there's that. The other thing I was wondering about was the feedback form. If it would be possible to have paper copies of that available at places like, I'm going to say Berwick by the Sea as an example, just because that's what I'm familiar with, but places where you know that elderly people are going to frequent, like maybe the community center, the senior center, because they're a population that are not necessarily all going to be into emails and web pages. And I think that would make that communication process a lot easier for them. What you were saying about the school district, that strikes home with me because I was a school, not of that school district, but a school district employee for a number of years. And one of my positions was as something called transitions educator, which was focusing on neurodivergent students, secondary students, and improving their transition into post-secondary life. And so when I look at the links for the school district, I don't see any mention of things like what is their work experience program for their students with disability, you know, whether it's the autism spectrum or, you know, intellectual disability or whatever however we want to call it. And I think there's a big link to be had here between the education focus and the employment focus. And I think it's a huge missed opportunity of how are these students spending their last few years in high school. Are they being put in art class? Not to mean art classes, but are they putting in art classes over and over, keyboarding, guitar, or something? Because there's a vacuum of understanding of what should be provided for them. I think of entities like Work BC or some of the community living organizations who are doing work for finding employment for diverse populations, and yet our students have to kill time doing these empty things in many cases, which is like to the tune of $85,000 a year or whatever it costs per student. And when we could have a collaboration between these different entities. And I was involved with a model of like that in Coquitlam that was unique and very successful. It just wasn't supported on a grand scale, called the Youth Employment Initiative, where one of the community living societies and their trained employment support people became part of the school staff, the student services staff, and found work experience placements with them, but all with a lens of how do you disclose your disability? How do you operate in a job interview? But at the same time, it was also educating of the prospective employers who aren't realizing the huge resource as employees that these people can be. Anyway, I don't want to belabor that to death because I could talk about it all day long. So I want to just see if somehow we can incorporate that like in somewhere in this plan, because there is a facet of collaboration because money and budget is always a stress point. But I think a lot of times if there was collaboration going on, it wouldn't necessarily cost more. It might cost more as a front-end loading, but I think in the long run, the collaboration is doable. We just have to get it to happen. Now, switching gears, the health one, there were some barriers looking at what my mother has reported as an elderly person, but who also has a mobility barrier, and also slower processing speed and hearing difficulty when she's receiving a lot of information from their healthcare provider, which we're all familiar with. We've been in that situation, and it frustrates me sometimes that among healthcare providers, there isn't more awareness of giving information in writing, instructions, how to take a medication, what's your next step in your healthcare. Talking more slowly, facing them. These are all, as my role as a educator of the deaf and hard of hearing, I'm quite familiar with these adaptations, but there's also the saying of necessary for some, beneficial for all. So it always struck me a lot of times these adaptations, whether you have a hearing loss or not, maybe you've got ADHD, maybe you've got some other disability, and anytime somebody is going to speak more slowly or put something in writing or make sure they're facing you when they talk, there's much more likely you're going to go away with some really vital information that you need to have. Exam tables that need to be adjustable by height, and it's amazing to me how often that doesn't happen. An understanding of staff that somebody might need to have help getting on and off of that, those things. Switching to something else, but it's also to do with the medical clinic where my mother goes to. And this is a structural issue. The handicap parking needs to be thoughtfully placed where the curb cut is, so that, or the crosswalk, so that if you're picturing yourself as somebody with a mobility or other disability that makes moving challenging, that you can see clearly, whether you're coming out of the driver's side door or the passenger side door, what is my path to get up off the curb and across the parking lot, or where you want to go. And it's amazing how often those components don't make any sense whatsoever. Automatic door openers is huge. And one of the organizations, if you want to call them that, and entities that I don't see here are retail stores. And I think the only way maybe you can bundle them up collectively is maybe if you looked at the business associations, the various neighborhood business associations. And I can give you tons of examples where, I don't know if is it okay to name a store as an example. I can just say a store, a big store. And so they'll have an automatic door opener for the main entrance. Then the person needs to go to the washroom. That door to go into the washroom, there's a handicap stall inside, and that's awesome. But the door to get in there weighs a ton. And you either have to wait for hope that somebody's going to come along and help you, or risk injuring yourself trying to push that door open. And then what happens when you have to leave? And we all have to access real retail stores throughout our daily life, and that represents having equal access in society and community. So I have come across, a lot of the times the reason I come across is that we just lease this building and we'd have to get the owner to do it, and he probably isn't going to. So I'm thinking, is there grant money out there that a business owner could access to incentivize them to do this? And if there is, how well is it known? Because sometimes these grants and programs that exist, and they're really helpful, but where the gap has been is getting them getting your target population aware of them. So I'm sorry, that was a lot. I think I've...
Thank you. If I could just note one thing about retailers is that they are not yet considered prescribed organizations under the Accessible BC Act. So that's hence why they're not, they haven't been included in regional committee or planning processes. Eventually, those standards will come into play in areas like built environment and service delivery. So they will have requirements placed on them, but not yet. It's right now, it's just the public sector. And Anne-Marie, you've had your hand up for a while, so just wanted to flag that in case that wasn't visible to the rest of the room.
Sorry.
Oh, no, just wanted to make sure that Anne-Marie got some time. Oh, you're muted right now, Anne-Marie.
I keep doing that. I just wanted to make some comments on, I believe Christine was the last speaker. I'm sorry, I don't see names.
That's right.
Okay, thanks. I attend some of the aqua arthritis and chronic disease management programs at the pool, and the Parks and Rec is currently doing a survey looking for feedback, and they've sent postcards to residents' houses. But I also noticed that in the pool in the foyer, there's a board up and Post-it notes and that sort of thing. So that also, I thought your idea of putting things in Berwick's house and the senior center and all of that is amazing. But the pool would also reach a number of seniors who may be sort of hanging out in the waiting area, waiting for their ride or the handy dart or what have you. So if we wanted to do that route, that was just a tag on to that. There is grant money for making buildings more accessible. I can't remember right now who it is. I work at Foundry, the John Howard Society, and we recently got grant money to put access buttons on a couple of our washrooms. So I can find out where that came from, and I can let folks know. Also, just as a point of information, Christine, when you were talking about employment and barriers to employment or moving from secondary school into post-secondary or into employment, I just wanted to let folks know that we have a partnership with NIAFs, we being Foundry, have a partnerships with NIAFs, and we have two people who work for a program called Foundry Works in Education, and their job is to help folks that are impacted by disability or other barriers like insecure housing or what have you, to help our clients make that transition into either education or work or both. And so they can, that's another path just to be aware of for some young people between the ages of, I think that one starts at 16 to 24.
Good.
I think that was what I wanted to say. Oh yeah, and one more thing. And also, although stores and that sort of thing aren't covered under the Accessible BC Act, they still are covered under the Human Rights Code. And the Human Rights Code has a presumptive duty to accommodate disability and all the other grounds to the point of undue hardships. So when you're looking at employment, housing, or services commonly available to the public, all of those retailers should be held to the BC Human Rights Code standard, even if they're not yet named in our act. And the standard to reach undue hardship, particularly for large chain stores, is very, very high. So it would be hard for something like Winners to say, hey, or London Drugs or whatever, to say, hey, we can't do this because of undue hardship, where a small business may actually have a legitimate undue hardship argument. I think those were my thoughts. Sorry, I'm a bit scattered today.
Thank you.
Yes. Would you like to speak again, Committee Member Delancey?
Yeah, I thought of another built environment detail that I've come across and found really, really helpful. When we lived in Duncan, if you've ever seen the North Cowichan rec complex, it's massive. It takes up a block, and it has all the things under one umbrella in there. And so I would take my mother there quite often. And one of the things that I loved and she loved were there were no curbs. And it was perfectly fine. Like you could still clearly see where the sidewalk began and the parking lot began because the color was different and the pavement was different, right? And there not being any curbs just made it so much easier. You know, you didn't have to worry that were the handicap spots all taken? Where's the curb cut? You know, because she can manage the distance okay, but it was getting up and down from the curb, and not having curbs was just wonderful. Maybe it's even less expensive as far as building costs go. One place in town that's like that, if anybody's familiar with that little plaza where the SoCal restaurant is, they don't have any curbs there either. And I just have thought how wonderful it is if that became more widespread practice. And I think the last thing that I wanted to point out today, whereas I understand that, you know, we're flipping our attitudes so that the onus of change comes on the rest of everybody else, if you want to call them that, and it shouldn't be for the person with the disability to have to change. One thing I would like to say is, and it might have a place here in your resources, as an educator in this area, we really focused a lot on self-advocacy skills, and it still needs a lot of work to empower people with disabilities. Right from, this could be an education issue too, right from when they're in school, right from when they start to be young, that, you know, about how do I disclose my disability? How do I ask for what I need? And you almost have to start when they're very, very young, because you know, their life is not just in school. When they're in school, it's very easy for them because everybody knows their classroom teacher has got their IEP or their diagnosis and all the strategies. So that child doesn't have to open their mouth. Well, what happens when they go out into the community and they go to the soccer class or the swim class or skating class or someplace, and all of a sudden, all those strategies and adaptations that were deemed so vital and necessary for them to be successful in school, it's like as soon as they step outside of that building, they don't exist. And a lot of times it doesn't occur to the parents too as well. And I think as soon as you can get the child self-advocacy for whatever it is that they need to help them, instilled in them that this is natural. It's a natural thing to ask. This is the language you use, and these are the expectations you should have for your issues being met. And in our adult population, I think, you know, the older you get, the less and less people with disabilities feel comfortable or confident because they didn't grow up in an era where we would even have a committee like this and be talking about these issues. So I think strengthening and empowering that population is a really important piece of this. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry, I can't see the whole room, so if I'm butting in, please forgive me. I wanted to note that we're an hour into the meeting, and we did have in our meeting agreements that we would take a break if there was a meeting that was longer than an hour. And we haven't heard from everyone. I know there are other folks that haven't shared any feedback yet, so wanted to put that back to the chair to say, is there room for a brain break for everyone for 5 minutes? And can we make sure that when we come back, folks that haven't had a chance to chat yet give us their ideas around the plan and what tweaks they might want to see?
Yes, thank you very much. As the chair speaking, Susan Sinnott. What does everyone around the table and online say about a break? I mean, we do have it in sort of the guidance, but I think at the end of the day, we can choose how we feel for capacity, because I see that Mr. Huell, the committee member Huell, was interested in making a comment at this point. Everyone want to show their hands up if they would like a break? Okay, we do have one. That's fine.
Can I just go to the bathroom if I need to?
Well, let's have a 5-minute break if that's sufficient for everyone. 5 to 10 minutes. What do you think online?
I don't think we need a break. I like the discussion. I just really have to pee.
Okay, well, we'll break 5 to 10 minutes. Have your break, and everyone can stretch if they need to and gather their thoughts. Thanks.
Can I just add one more thing? I just, if you'll notice around people that have struggled fitting in with the common man apologize all the time. And every time we talk, we say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And that's part of the damage that's been done to us. So, and the other thing, please, I don't have a disability. I have a different ability, different abilities. I actually have a superpower. You don't know what it is yet, but you will. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take a 5 to 10 minute break, and when people return, we'll resume.
Go through the door, hang a left.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to note that online I can't hear in the room. Okay.
Okay, we're ready. I think we're ready to restart. I think we're at the point where Committee Member Houle wanted to add some input on the proposed plan.
Yes. Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. As I sort of explored my community this summer, being new to blindness, I still don't know what I don't know yet. But one of the things I came across was in Willow Point by Discovery Foods, the street light for crossing there, they have a little arrow on there that vibrates when it's safe to cross. And then I never really noticed any other place in town. And then I noticed one at the bottom of, I think it's St. Anne's, the one that comes down past the casino and meets Highway 19A. That intersection is quite busy. And as a totally blind person, I was trained to listen to traffic patterns, and that particular intersection is very difficult to sort of identify when it's safe to cross, going by the traffic patterns when you're listening. And I noticed that on that one too, they had a little arrow that vibrates when you cross. And those are the only two places in town that I've noted. But I thought maybe, that in future infrastructure projects, that's something that may be considered. I don't know if that's an upgrade or if it was just a choice, but for a person like myself that is relying strictly on audio cues, if a cement truck pulls up or there's construction going on or there's some teenager with his loud music going, I can't identify what's happening. And I thought that was, I've never noticed that in any other city, and I thought that was great, and if maybe that could be considered in any future projects, if you have a choice on which ones to buy. And the other thing that I've also noticed we don't have here, which would be a real cheap or inexpensive upgrade, would be some way of identifying on the ground where, like, let's say we're walking along the seawall and there's a number of highway crossings, and I could walk right by it. I don't know where it is. And in Denver, they have these plates that they screw down to the sidewalk, and they're just elevated little dots. And when you're running your cane, you feel them. And it'd be a good identifier to let you know that there is a place to cross there. Anyways, I thought those were some couple things that I've identified as I'm learning my way through this, and thought that maybe it would be worth mentioning.
I think those are great ideas, and bring them back to the city on the transportation plan. Sorry, Committee Member Mann is speaking now.
Yeah, I think in sitting here and listening to everyone, I was just thinking about the barriers noted. And I think the concern is maybe that partner organizations might kind of interpret this as an exhaustive list, but it seems like it's more of a living document. Like, we're listing more things now. And it was such a small brainstorming session that we had. And I think would it be nice to maybe include a link in this plan at the bottom that people can access and then submit further barriers that they would know, like community members. Yeah. And then also, I mean, our representation is only so small, and we want that contribution from other folks.
Thank you very much. Is there another person online? I think we have people with their hands up. We've got Lisa McDougall-Lee.
Hello, thank you. I just wanted to add, as the last gentleman was speaking, it made me think the other day I was driving through down, Long Willow Point where they've made all those changes in the seawalk, which is lovely. But at night, it is really hard to see. And I'm a runner. And I was with a running group as well. So that was in my car. But also as I was a runner, I noticed that the stretch that we would take from Discovery Foods back to where we started, it was also very dimly lit. And so for safety of seniors, there's also, I think, 2 or 3 metal grates. And it just was very poorly lit. Also, the trees there lose their leaves, so it was very slick. And I did notice that as a challenge to even myself as a more able-bodied person. I do wear glasses, and if I don't have my glasses on, my vision is not nearly as good. But I did find that was, as I was driving, I was like, wow, this is, if you had any kind of limitation on your vision in the evening, and when it's really stormy here, it was really hard to see. And it was hard to see the median that runs along there, and being the way they developed the road being so narrow, I just felt that was a challenge.
And thank you for, I think I just want to pass along what SRD staff mentioned. We do have the ability to add more barriers over time, and then it'll be sent out to all the various participating organizations. I do want people to think that we're going to have some practical outcomes. Is there a commentary from you, Ms. Kelly, first, before I make some comments that I think might be helpful?
I was just thinking that we're getting towards the end of the meeting, and I know that we are looking to ask this group, do you endorse the plan? Do you endorse the plan with certain changes? So wanted to just kind of pull us back up to say I've heard a lot of barriers that we need to note out of today's session. So spelling errors and name corrections that need to be made in the appointed members list. And a couple typos, but otherwise, like from a content perspective for the plan, I think you're right to point out is there going to be an expanded list in this plan, or is that going to go into the spreadsheet that's worked with the partner organizations? Because someone used the term living document. I don't think this is a living document. It's a snapshot in time. And the ongoing work of capturing more barriers it's wise to note that. I think it could be helpful to have something right in that barrier list to say, like, here's a hyperlink to the feedback mechanism to reiterate that this is, of course, not exhaustive, but this will have to be finalized so that it can be published, and we can task those partner organizations with starting their own plans. So that's kind of the balance with how much additions you want to this particular version of the plan.
Thank you. Okay, so because I sit on council for probably the biggest decision maker and the biggest impactful area for people living with these, I want to say it was excellent presentations this week by the SRD. And the issue of aging population impacts pretty much every region more outside of Campbell River. There is a lot of aging population in the smaller remote communities, so we have to take that into account, I think, and as a special consideration. We also have various plans progressing right now at the city, and the master transportation plan is one that we have pulled currently as council to have further discussions with staff. So this is a great time to talk about that. And excuse me, I pulled it up because one of the practical things that could come out of this is a requirement to go back to our planning partners and have an accessibility lens put on these various things. They do have in the plan currently various visions and outcomes. One of them is to be more inclusive. That's an objective on the plan. But the measurements that are being proposed, I don't think fit with what this committee would say. So we've just heard today from Committee Member Huell that we would need more sensory indicators for people with vision limitations. That is not in the current plan. It talks about curb ramps. We've heard that curb ramps aren't necessarily useful if they're not actually practically tested, and that's not in the plan. So these types of back and forth inputs are going to be important to the city before we start doing things to standardize designs, which apparently may not be meeting the needs of the actual users. We've heard about different practical ways of moving forward. So we've heard about various businesses, and I mentioned to Renee whether we could create a badge program so the SRD could issue accessibility approved locations, retail otherwise. And then we need to talk about how we move out to our various partners in terms of maybe developing model policy or model bylaws and recommendations to zoning. And I'm going to say right now, because we are in an affordability crisis for housing, we have to be very careful how we approach that with our various developers and builders. I'm just going to say we need to be sure it's a win-win. I'm not going to say it's going to be super expensive, but there could be trade-offs that we have to do in terms of benefits that we grant to our builders and people for renovations in terms of how we structure that. We have grant writing services available in the city of Campbell River, and whether we want to add that to SRD or various planning partners, they can obtain renovation money to do accessibility improvements, as well as having more people in our community that have issues, including needs for greater accessibility, give feedback in our planning processes for each of our local governments and our regions, and whether we can do outreach to make sure their voices are heard. I can say today, I went and tried to access the Campbell River Parks plan online. It was a struggle for me. I can't imagine what it would be like for people who have neurodiversity or other issues in terms of the frustration that would cause. So I'm going to talk to city staff about that, my personal experience. We do have a duty to accommodate human rights, and as everyone knows in the city of Campbell River, we have a considerable strategic priority of ensuring a safe community that's accessible. We have people with accessibility issues that create other issues for people with accessibility issues, and it would be helpful to have commentary from the group on how do we reach a balance. I don't know if there's people who already feel vulnerable accessing downtown core areas in their towns or in our towns and don't feel that it's a reasonable safety time or available to them to access, and they have other impediments. The impression I have from commentary is, yes, there are issues. If I had my now deceased father at the age of 88 with his walker or wheelchair trying to get into certain areas of town, I'd feel very uncomfortable that he was vulnerable. That's not to say the people that we're dealing with that have these other challenges don't need to be accommodated, but there is a trade-off, and we need to find some sort of commonality and direction on how we reach those. So that's, I think the idea of self-advocacy strikes home for me. I have family members who are people who do not feel proud to say that they have learning issues or difficulty interfacing in complex government or banking or other relationships. And again, I'm not sure how we do that or move forward, but it'd be interesting to get information from staff on how people with hidden impairments or lack of abilities or with special abilities can be treated with the respect and dignity that they deserve and not feel fearful that they have to disclose their mental or physical health issues that aren't apparent. I mean, I can imagine if you're a person that suffers from continual migraines or other impairment issues, we can talk about them, that it's not dignified that you have to get up and say, I've got these issues. I need to hear from you in a quiet zone, or I need a place with lower light or other things. Anyway, I know that isn't so much a barrier. It's more like, how do we move forward in the plan and create awareness and systems? And we have to lead the way. And I think that's where we're going to start with our partners who are bound by the Act. And hopefully then it gets rolled out to more places. But those are my comments. Is there anything, Trish, that helped you on that?
I'm just noting the time in terms of, I think we're supposed to vote, and I'm feeling we've only got 5 minutes left. I just got a little reminder, so wanted to flag that.
Okay, well then I'm going to take some control here. We do have one member who did write in and ask for additional time before we accepted the plan. And so the first question would be, before we can vote on receipt, whether we move ahead on the plan. So why don't we do a motion to receive, finish that off. So all in favor of receiving the plan that we've received? Any opposed? And seeing none, it's received. I think the question is from staff at SRD, do we want to accommodate the one member who needs a little bit more time to come back with some comments, or move ahead with the plan as presented, or we want to vary the plan in any way today? Or do we want to set a special meeting to include that member? I know it's very difficult for a lot of us to attend at a certain time and date. So does anyone want to make a motion? I'm trying to get some, actually, I'm going to ask staff to give me some direction on this one.
Well, what I've heard today is we've had a lot of additions to our barrier spreadsheet that we can take to our partners and identify some actions and more of an action plan. We did, have some feedback that this is an inspirational plan or aspirational plan, not necessarily loaded with actions. So I think there's a few choices regarding that action item component. We either leave the plan as it is and we work on actions and bring, some of those forward at our next meeting. Or if the group prefers, we hold this plan, work on a more tactile action plan, and endorse them all at the same time. Originally we were, going to launch the plan, have the partners adopt the plan in their own organizations, and then, come back in September with some feedback on progress. Or we delay that and, create more of an action plan in this first plan. This is a first plan, and there's no reason we couldn't also adopt it and add to it for our September meeting. So just some suggestions there on different approaches.
So for people who need some guidance, we have two proposed motions that our committee either endorse the Strathcona Accessibility Plan or endorse the Strathcona Accessibility Plan with agreed upon changes. And I think the third would be we defer it for a further meeting before we endorse it. So I can't move it because I'm the chair. Someone has to make a motion so we can debate it.
Cindy Rogers, SD84. I would like to, I really like the plan. I think the work that's been done on it is fantastic, Renee, well done. But there was one where we could adopt it, but then keep working on it. Because I think that identifying the barriers, but I want to move past identifying barriers and actually have just some strategies in here or proposals as to what we're doing next.
So is the
motion
proposed motion be that we endorse the current Strathcona Accessibility Plan, then have a subsequent motion to have a review session in September? Is that acceptable, Renee? Or is there going to be one anyway in September?
Okay. Yeah, there is going to be one, right?
So would you just want to make the motion that we accept the plan, knowing that there's going to be a review in September?
Correct. I will.
So now I'm looking for a seconder.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Okay, now it's open to debate. Is there anyone who wants to debate the motion? Yes, I see Anne Marie wants to make a comment.
As I said earlier, I really like what's there, but I'm concerned that it's aspirational and not actionable. And I would actually like a motion to not accept it right now, to have another meeting where we can come back with tangible priority areas to put in the document and then vote on it then. So what's there is great, but I think it's really missing that action piece.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to speak on the motion?
I think I would second that just because I'd like to give the opportunity to the person who wanted to review that plan more. And I'm not quite sure why they wanted to. Maybe they just needed more time, or it could be because of their own barriers. Okay. Just, so that's why I'd just like to give that member that opportunity.
Okay, anyone else want to comment on the motion?
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Houle.
Well, we're here now. Why don't we just take 5 minutes and listen to what the person has to say and carry on?
I don't think they're available today. That was the issue. They had a conflict.
Cindy Rogers, school, you know where I'm from. Does that mean if we don't accept it now, does that mean we have to come back then?
Correct.
Correct.
It would be rescheduled using, I take it, the same process before is to find out an acceptable date for all of us.
Okay, okay. I like that. I didn't think of that. I'm just so worried that we're not going to be doing anything with this. So I agree to wait.
Okay. Is there anyone online who has anything more to say? Okay, so are we able to call the question? So the current motion on the floor is that we're going to endorse the Strathcona Accessibility Plan. If that's defeated, then we can entertain another motion. So who's in favor of the current motion? Mr. Huell? Anyone online? Okay. You're in favor of the current motion too? Yes, so we've got 2 in favor, and who's opposed? 1, 2, 3. Well, that means it's defeated. So would someone put a motion on the floor that we are going to defer the plan until a further meeting to be scheduled?
I can move that. It's Anne Marie.
And seconder?
I will second that. Oh,
Okay, so I'm assuming we don't need any further debate. We've kind of done this. So all in favor of that motion for the deferral and rescheduling? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Any opposed? That is carried. Okay, so we have 2 more items that are on the agenda that I can see. We have the correspondence so that the Strathcona Accessibility Inclusion Advisory Committee webpage capture from the Strathcona Regional District website be received. Could I get a mover and a seconder?
I'll move that we receive that document.
Thank you.
I can second that.
Yes, thank you. These are usually pro forma. There isn't a lot of debate on this, so all in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. That's carried. And then we have a further correspondence. The correspondence from the Winter 2023 Spinal Cord Injury BC Quarterly Magazine regarding electronic vehicle charging stations be received. I'll need a mover and seconder.
I can move that that was received.
Thank you. A seconder?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Again, all in favor? Any opposed? And is there, I think that's carried, I'll make the declaration. Is there a chance that this should be sent out to the various municipalities, at least who are planning infrastructure, so that they have that information for their planning departments?
I will follow up with all the organizations regarding the outcome of today.
Great, thank you. And then I need a motion for termination.
Cindy Rogers, I motion that the meeting be terminated.
I can second that.
Usually there's not a lot of discussion on this. All in favor? Any opposed? We are done. Thank you very much. And thank you for everyone for attending, and thank you for Ms. Kelly for the presentation. And I think we will wait for Renee to send out the doodle poll. Is that what it is? And everyone kindly respond with your available dates. Thank you.